Both are really active on Twitter. I checked. I wanted to find out who had more followers. So, Father Petri has it. He is currently sitting pretty at 23,700. But Dr. Pecknold is nothing to be sneezed at either. He has 21,200. So
we go back and forth on that.
No, you've always led.
No. You had when you did Civ Day, you were like 5,000 ahead of me.
Okay, fair. That was the Civ Day boom. That was where I...
Yeah, and I don't know this Catholic Herald thing. You should be getting more followers off of this. You should be leaving me in the dust.
Why don't you announce that?
Follow the Catholic Herald's Daily Herald with Chad Pecknold.
You can make that happen, Father.
I could. Well, the thing is, 23,000, I mean, the overlap is...
And it's pathetic when you look at, compare us to Bishop Barron or, the Pope. I mean, we're never going to catch up to the Pope.
No. There's just something right about that.
Millions and millions of followers. So it's not the number of followers you have, but the content you put out.
Exactly. Chad and I have done this already. This is the second time we've given a sort of lecture like this or a panel. It's really more of a conversation between the two of us. It's still kind of a work in progress, but we've got our 10 principles down. In this form, I don't feel like I need to say a whole lot about St. Thomas Aquinas when we talk about the Thomistic principles of social media, just to say a couple things, because he is a Dominican, and my favorite person to talk about, other than the Lord Jesus Christ, is he was born in the 13th century, was really a genius of a person. I won't go through his whole history, but he studied at the University of Paris. He eventually taught there. He eventually became a student master. The order gave him his own studentate in Rome. And so it was like the West Point of Dominican seminaries, if you will. So much so that St. Thomas had authority to send Dominican seminarians, which we call student brothers, back to their provinces if they didn't perform. Right, so it was a West Point of Dominican formation. He was the author of multiple volumes. They say that he would have 5 or 6 scribes working at one time on 5 or 6 different projects. He would go down the line, paragraph by paragraph, 5 different works, that by the time he got back to the first one, he'd pick up to the very next paragraph of that particular work. I mean, it was an inspired, charismatic genius. And despite all of that, he was characteristically shy and very humble. He never used the truth to beat people up. We'll talk about that a little bit later. He died in 1274, canonized in 1323, after having been accused, even after his death, of being a heretic, for which the Dominicans had to rally to his defense, especially in Paris. And it was Pope St. Pius V, whose feast day is on Tuesday, who declared him a doctor of the church. Pius V, as you know, is also a Dominican. Every man who was ordained to the priesthood from basically the 16th century until at least 1983, but most still do today, learned St. Thomas's theology and his system to become a priest. It was just standard. He showed how to bring revelation and reason together, faith and reason. And the Summa, as you probably are aware of its format, has something like 3,113 questions, all thoroughly answered. And not only does he answer them, he anticipates your objections to his answers, and he answers those as well. So he's a great reminder of what faith and reason and interaction with interlocutors and opponents of the faith, and even disputes within the faith, can be. Okay. I know Chad wants to say a little bit something about Paris and the pursuit of truth. Just to say that everything for St. Thomas is about pursuing evangelization and pursuing God and everything that he studies.
I want to add a biographical note too, which is rooted in a contrast between the ancient academy and the medieval university at Paris. That the ancient academy begins, as you know, with Socrates and Aristotle and Plato, on this great quest for the highest truth, and it ends in skepticism, right? The Third Academy is this deeply skeptical, probabilistic kind of framework in which you never assent to any truth because every truth is going to be mixed with error, and so you're a wise man will not assent to any truth. So this is how the ancient academy differs from the medieval university, because the medieval university is penetrated with the Christian view that reason has redemption, right? That reason has the divine revelation, that has God's word, and so that reason can be healed. Reason can be purified, elevated, without being left behind. Reason gets healed. And the medieval university is the model of this through a culture of disputatio. The disputatio culture that builds up in Paris is a culture which is rooted around disputes that are on the way, right? They are viatoris, kind of, we are pilgrims on the way to the fullness of truth. This is the evangelistic side of it, that we are pilgrims on the way. But the confidence that the medieval university had is that the disputes are rooted in truth, that truth can be known, and we know that truth can be known because truth has been revealed in Jesus Christ.
He is truth,
right?
yeah.
He is truth itself who has been revealed to us. So we don't have to end like the skeptics, right? The medieval university has this security of knowing the truth, that revelation can heal reason. And so the disputatio culture brings reason and revelation together all the time in the public square of the university. But I think that thinking about Thomas's concept, or the studium, right? The disputes that happen in the studium are nested disputes. They're nested in a set of premises that you can actually make progress. The dispute can be productive. The problem with the public square today is that we actually don't have our disputes nested in anything. And this is what makes our disputes very dogged and hard to make progress with. In a sense, our disputes in the public square are like the Third Academy in Athens, not like Thomas experiences in the University of Paris. And so we have to be a presence if we are going to have an apostolate in social media, and not everybody needs to have one, but if you're going to have that as an aspect of your ministry, you need to keep that in mind, that you are dealing with Third Academy Athens, and you want to move Third Academy Athens to the University of Paris in the 13th century.
Because Twitter obviously is not, as you know, I mean, is everyone here on Twitter or social media for the most part? So 140 characters, 240 characters.
280.
280, sorry. I know it's 280 now, which has been helpful.
You just type until the red.
Yeah, until I get to the red. And then I figure out which letters and characters I should take out to get
I
it
gotta
back
take
down.
that out.
So, start taking out vowels here and there, yeah. The disputatio method, and this is sort of one of the first principles we want to mention, is this method of not only of pursuing truth and that truth can be known, and I think as Professor Pecknold says, Twitter is not, I like that word, nested within the premises of faith and reason, that they sort of go together. In fact, I think in most of the public square and social interaction we have in our country today, there aren't a lot of shared premises for a lot of things, right? But we can still take the moves of Aquinas, if you will, how he sort of moves in his milieu, and translate them and use them effectively in Twitter. And one of them has to do with the disputatio method, which is the first principle of the 10. St. Thomas was known, because he was a genius, he never argued against straw men. When you watch Twitter and you see arguments on Twitter, what you will find is that most people will dispute, and they will argue with the most caricature, simplistic view of their opponent's position. St. Thomas was not like that, okay? When he came in, and you see it in the Summa, and the Summa is kind of an abbreviated version of it. The longer versions would be like the disputed questions on truth, the disputed questions on virtues. If you've ever read those works, the whole point is he would come in and ask a question, and he would have his students give their opinions and their arguments. And then as the master, the magister, he would help them make their arguments better, even though he knew they were wrong. He would help them make their arguments better, and then he would show them basically how to think properly, and how to pursue truth properly, and how to rationalize properly. And then only then, after he's given them the best possible manifestation of their own opinion, he would then dispute and sort of break it down on why it was incorrect. that is a much more robust way of interacting with your opponents, if you will, or those that you disagree with, than simply going at the worst caricature that they themselves sometimes present, right? The classic example for me is in the question of gay marriage, right? The argument that those who want to get married and who are gay should be able to do so because they love each other is the stupidest and simplest argument it's a caricature argument and is easily able to be refuted. We don't marry our mothers. We don't marry our dogs. Some have tried. But to come to help people identify actually larger reasons why, say, gay people could argue for marriage, and then to break down those reasons would be is something that Thomas would do. Does that make sense?
The only thing I would add to that principle is that principle is guided by, it's not something Thomas just makes up, right? This is something that comes out of Athens too. That in Athens they identified two kinds of argument, dialogistai and eristai. That our word dialogue comes from the dialogistai, this way of actually, in dialogistai is built on friendship. You think of the Platonic banquet table, of drinking wine together, of becoming friends, and that's why you help your friend make the better argument, because the dispute is rooted in love.
That's right.
The dispute is rooted in friendship, so you're thinking, how can I make your argument better? Because I love you. Aristai disputes is named after one of the goddesses of conflict, struggle. She's the goddess who helped start the Trojan War, and this is the kind of dialogue or disputes that you get in, which are friend-enemy distinction. And there, if your friend-enemy or frenemy doesn't supply, if they give an objection and you know that the objection's imperfect, in Aristai you don't help them, right? Because that's actually better for you that they've made an objection that's a bad objection, right? So you just let them go, because in the end that's going to help you, right? Mm-hmm. That's a kind of frenemy thing. So to think about the way in which you're not making straw men, that's like such an abstract thing. You connect with the person to think, this person is someone I want to be a friend, and I want to establish a friendship. And if you can't have that, then just don't have the conversation.
Yeah, that's right. The whole point of Christian love is that we are in fact called to love everyone with the love of Jesus Christ, right? And so in that sense, we're called to love everyone with a certain love of friendship, which is pursuing the mutual good, which is the Lord himself. Mm-hmm. With your first one there?
So the next principle
builds off of this,
follows from this very nicely, is Twitter is very much about politics, right? Always privilege truth over politics. That the use of the medium for political ideological gain is near constant. And if you are going to be a presence in that, you need to be a witness for truth above politics. There's a tendency for Catholics especially to say, well, the church is above politics, and so what's in every political position belongs in the church. I think it ends up being a kind of both sidesism. And there's a fuzziness in that. The better thing is to say, well, the church upholds the truth, and what we want to pursue is the truth. And if that's going to fall on one side or another, that's fine. But we're not partisans in the sense or if we're not partisans, we're also not bipartisans of anything but the truth. We're partisans of the truth. And so the disputes of the disputatio are questions about what's the object, what's the true thing. And to make a presence on social media that is always announcing the true thing and trying to insert the truth into what is almost inevitably an ideological dispute.
I think as a priest, where this comes into play on Twitter, and I've not always been as good at this as I hope I've become better at it, but looking at future priests and even as a religious, there is a temptation among American Catholics who are on social media or in the public square, who are very active and pay attention to political life, what you might call intentional voters.
Mm-hmm.
They know who stands for what, they know what the parties stand for, to decidedly and publicly come down in favor of one political party over another. Now, some of that is completely understandable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's one party that clearly is in many ways a party of death and supports intrinsic evils and a lot of things. But the difficulty, it seems to me, is when priests sort of pursue, when they make partisan statements. There will be people in the pews who do not know, who are not catechized, and some who don't even know their party's positions on certain things, right? That you are sort of harping on or calling out and challenging. And if you do that in a way that is overly partisan and overly political, you are in fact closing off avenues to evangelization for those people in the pews who might actually vote for the other party. Does that make sense? I saw this as a priest very strongly during the 2016 election, when it did seem like there were priests on social media actively campaigning for Donald Trump. All right, now, better than them actively campaigning for Hillary Clinton, but it's still a problem because there are parishioners now who know that about them, and they were so strong in their denunciation of the person Hillary Clinton that it's hard to believe that they themselves now can speak to the people in the pews who voted for her, right? And so this is why the church always encourages priests and clerics to avoid extreme partisan statements in politics.
To always aim at the precept.
Aim at the precepts and the
Aim
teachings.
at the principles. Aim at the precepts. Aim at the truths. And there's going to be collateral from that.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to look like my friend Charlie Camosi is a Democrat for life, and because he's principled, right? He's aiming at the principle,
right.
A pro-life ethic, but he's a Democrat, and he does that beautifully. I'm a conservative. I try to stay out of supporting candidates, but you're going to aim at the precepts, and there's, I think, lay people have a
I think there's more freedom.
I don't even want to call it freedom. There's a kind of different orders of what you can and cannot say.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that's right, and I think the different orders, especially it feeds in a little bit to what we're experiencing in the church these days, that there is the competence of the layperson that needs to be respected, and the competence of the layperson is in many ways the political field, right? That as priests, as clerics, as religious, we should really, even if we have strong personal political opinions, we should really be sensitive and careful on how that gets expressed, because anything that would cut me off from being able to preach the gospel to a certain segment can be a problem, Which is, if me preaching truth and principle cuts me off, that's different. If it's me simply making ad hominem support or attacks, that's very difficult, That's it.
Yeah, but you have.
No, you got it.
You put it together, right?
Yeah. There you go. Sorry.
You announced that.
Okay, so but I'm gonna let you take it.
Yeah, but you announced the principle.
Okay. The third principle, so the first is, the disputatio, the friendship, no straw men. The second is the privileging truth above politics. The third one is to discern shared premises and to anticipate objections. The shared premises, this is, I think, for me, when I'm on Twitter, and Professor Pecknold's much better at this than I am. I don't have a lot of time to engage every single person that replies to me. I know you were trying at one point. I don't know if you're still...
I have less time now.
to do that, but there are some people who reply to you, and who you clearly can tell from the very moment they tweet at you, they're actually not looking for a conversation.
On life, I will do it.
On life issues
on
of
abortion,
life.
I will give time because there's nothing that matters more to me than the babies. So.
But it's so often having discerning whether or not there are shared premises. St. Thomas says that when it comes to dispute, you always have to be able to appeal to higher knowledge, to higher science, what he calls higher science. So the example he gives is when you're disputing someone who's a believer, if there's a theological dispute, you appeal to scripture and magisterial tradition. But if you're disputing with someone who doesn't accept scripture or magisterial theological tradition, he's pretty pessimistic that you're not going to be able to get very far in that dispute, right? Now, in the natural order, you might be able to say if there's some sort of common premises on the nature of humanity, the nature of reason, the nature of the human species. But in some conversations, especially in this town, we find that there's not often shared premises on that either, right? But I want to be more optimistic to say that more people do have shared premises with the truth and revelation. They just haven't thought about it deeply.
And sometimes you actually, if you have time for the conversation, that should be one of your aims in the conversation, to point to the precept, but also see if you can drill down into a shared premise that maybe is not articulated yet. What is our shared premise? Do we have one? Is there any sort of bedrock that actually makes this dispute intelligible?
Fourth,
use authorities well. This is something Thomas always does. He uses authorities well. Obviously, people disagree. You see this in the Summa, right? You can use Augustine for one thing, and then you can use Augustine for another thing, and what's the truth, right? And you can see priests and laymen and bishops presenting authorities and presenting scriptural authorities for one end, and it might even seem like a political end. And then someone appealing to a different set of authorities. So how you use authorities, my sense is that many bishops and priests, when they engage in social media, simply present authorities. You present a quote from Thomas, or you present a quote from something from the readings that day, or from the Liturgy of Hours, or something, right? You're just presenting authorities. And that's fine. That's edifying. But there's also a way in which you can misuse authorities for all sorts of purposes, and that ends up usually sparking disputes that aren't productive. And so if you're aware of how you're using authorities, you have a leg up, I think, in these social media.
Where I see this in Twitter working really well is in I don't know if you follow people like, I don't know what Catholic Twitter is. I hear this, and I hear there's Catholic Twitter and weird Catholic Twitter, and I don't know what, but we basically have three great canon lawyers on Twitter. We have Ed Peters, Ed Condon, and J.D. Flynn, right? And it's sort of fun. Every now and then the three of them will get going on these threads about what this means. And of course, it's easy to say can't appeal to canon law as authority, right? And that's where Twitter, I think, becomes educative.
Yeah.
You
learn a lot.
You learn a lot from these people.
From a dispute. From expertise.
That's respectful, and that's where you see the friendship of the three are playing out.
Yeah.
When it comes to using the authorities, I think sometimes I've seen where people will post a quote, but say from Aquinas or Augustine or from some church document, but there's no context to it. And immediately there'll be like 5 replies that have completely taken issue because there was no context given. So using authorities to, because what's lacking in Twitter is that it's pure, what's the right word, pure democracy. And it's a free-for-all of opinions and ideas. So being able to invoke, especially as Catholics, here's what Pius V said, and here's how its ramifications in this conversation. Here's what Thomas Aquinas says, and here's what it means for us. That's very important.
Well, it's precisely what the ancients feared most about democracy is this mob. It's the ochlos, it's the crowd that calls for Barabbas. The ochlos that calls for Barabbas is on Twitter. And so you have to, sometimes that means that you have to be Christ and be the one who takes the abuse. And that's a risk of Twitter. And
can I say this too about authorities and citations and quoting and getting in these arguments, and when someone produces an authority, it's important on Twitter to be able to apologize, to say I was wrong.
Yes.
And I find that when you do that, the level of street cred, if you will, on Twitter that you get it goes incredibly higher.
Yeah.
Because that's in these online debates what often people aren't willing to do. My experience on online debates started in the 1990s before there was an internet, when I was just a geek with a modem and getting on bulletin board systems, and we would have all sorts of local online debates, and the ability to apologize and to say that's a great authority.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that, is an important skill to cultivate.
Mm-hmm.
Deeply humbling, but important to cultivate.
Your turn.
Oh, is it my turn? Okay. We're up at number 5 here. So we're going to illuminate reality with God and good distinctions. It's somewhat related to number 7, which was to humanize through humor and humility, but to illuminate reality with God and good distinctions, not only to make the distinctions, and I'll let Professor Pecknold talk a little bit about that, but to illuminate Twitter with God, social media with God. Now, how do you do that? Some of it is just praising the Lord. Sometimes it's just as simple as praising the Lord, right? Sometimes it's as simple as, the photo of one's beautiful little 3-year-old blonde daughter, playing on a swing set and giving thanks to God for her, Sometimes I think of Catherine Lopez. You all follow Catherine Lopez and her ability to take these sort of random shots while she's in churches praying. Twitter can be a cesspool of argument, of disagreement, of suffering and pain and ugliness. But to bring God into it, because God wants to be in the cesspool, right? To bring God into that and to be an agent of that is an important part of being a disciple of Jesus Christ.
Better to illuminate than merely to shine.
Yeah.
Is a Thomistic truism. A lot of people want to shine, and there's a lot of peacock preening on social media, but not a lot of illumination. So if you're going to enter the apostolate of social media, you have to say, okay, how much of this is just me wanting to be seen, and how much is this me wanting to draw people to Christ? How much of this is me wanting to advance God's kingdom, and how much of this wanting me to advance my kingdom? And that's an honest question that we should ask ourselves as a daily examine if we are going to be present on social media. And some days it'll just be you. But to keep that in mind, that we're going to illuminate with God, and that in God all the truths reside as one and united, but in us we have to make distinctions, and so we also illuminate through distinctions.
Making distinctions is, of course, a classic Dominican and Thomistic thing. In 280 characters, it's easy to paint with a broad brush, right? And one of the challenges I find when I tweet various things around, if it's a subtle truth or a subtle issue, is once again finding the way to do that in 280 characters, or at most 1 or 2 tweets in a row, right? But this is what is sorely lacking, not simply in social media discourse, but in discourse in general, right? Yeah. When you're, and some of you either will have this training at some point in your life, and I hope you have this opportunity, or maybe you've already had it. when you receive training to do media appearances or to speak to the media, there's all these rules. That the best practices. So if you're on television, a 15 to 30 second answer is all you should prepare for.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on the radio, you can go 30 to 45 seconds. And
pithy.
it's very pithy, and which doesn't leave a lot of room for distinction. So to be having a clear mind of which words to use and how to frame it so that you get at least someone can discern at least the semblance of a distinction is radically important. And something like Twitter can be a good training ground for doing that.
And to be open to the distinction that would flow from a dispute or from an objection, right? Thomas often splits the difference with his objectors. And I think on Twitter there's the tendency to never want to split the difference, right? Just refusal of every kind of objection. And I think that's something we have to try to resist in ourselves, is to recognize a partial truth in somebody who's objecting to us is a really good discipline. If you're going to enter a social media apostolate, you have to think, okay, people are going to disagree, and they're going to disagree strongly. Is there anything, any partial truth in this objection that I can affirm? 6, recognize people, not handles. I remember I was on Twitter. I got on Twitter and I started an account because Patrick Deneen told me to start an account, but I didn't really in 2014. But I didn't really get on until 2015, which was a really interesting time to get on because it was the run-up to the 2016 election. So my training, as it were, on Twitter was really tied to the election. And of course there were all these anonymous, turns out many of them were bots, but all these anonymous accounts that were made basically to do kind of online campaign wars. And I was very shaken by that, viscerally shaken by interacting with some were bots, some were not bots, but a kind of behind the anonymity of accounts, you feel like there's some dark force that's pushing at you, right? And maybe there is, right? That's something to think about, dark forces that push on social media. You should think about that. But the way I started trying to resist this is, even if it wasn't a person, I was going to imagine there was a person. This has helped me enormously, is to say that on the other end of that anonymous account with a weird Japanese cartoon or some weird picture of a sword or whatever, there are these weird accounts, just to try to imagine that person, however they're interacting with you, as a person with a mother and a father. That's a hugely humanizing, to think every handle has a mother and a father.
We've all know, and this is increasingly being commented on, the level of vitriol and brashness that people will display when they can hide behind an anonymous comm box, an anonymous account. For me, that was always the most important thing, why I needed to always use. I've never been tempted to use an anonymous priest account, even though it would make some things easier to say, perhaps. Right. Though the Student Brothers did really believe I was Father
Dialogue,
Dr. Dialogue,
yeah.
SJ for a long time.
Yeah.
So
that was a very amazing account.
It was a great little parody.
Giant.
But it's important, I think, to see this as an interaction of places. This is why I take a little bit of offense or umbrage when people suggest Twitter is not a real place. It is. Now, your life shouldn't be in Twitter, and if it is, we can talk. We got to talk. We really got to talk. But these are real people interacting with other real people about real ideas, real souls,
mortal souls,
with real questions, real opinions, real issues. And to say that it's not real then is a problem. And it has...
Or to say that the church shouldn't be there.
Say the church shouldn't be, say priests shouldn't be there. The priests should be where people are, right? And what goes on Twitter has, quote, real world effects. I think about the Colin Kaepernick fiasco, how Nike in like one day lost millions of dollars because of a Twitter storm. Now they got it back 2 days later, but I mean, there's real world consequences.
I mean, presidents, politicians, they're all communicating through Twitter now. Most of their major statements are communicated in this medium.
Yeah.
It's where public discourse is now happening. I mean, I've even seen now the news programs. What the news does now is on TV, they show the tweet.
That's how I got started on Twitter. Why do I need the news to tell me what's going on Twitter? I'll just get on it myself.
So it's almost like everything's sort of downstream from Twitter in American public culture, and it's a strange thing. And there needs to be a presence, but it needs to be a humanizing presence.
And that's number 7 on our. We're coming down. We have about 17 more minutes here, but to humanize through humor and humility.
17 more principles.
No. I added a few. Humanize through humor and humility, especially as priests. What I find some of the loveliest, and this is not to say I do this. I don't do this to get lovely feedback, because I'm not. You're not on Twitter. It's one of the things Professor Pecknold mentioned earlier. It's to illuminate, not to draw attention to myself. So you got to be careful, because you start to get a lot of followers. You start looking at how many times any tweets, all of your tweets are like retweeted. Oh, this one's up to 1,300, and it's only been like 10 minutes. It's great. I mean, that's a problem, right? But one of the things, and I don't do this very often, because as a Dominican and just my own personality, I am a very private person in a lot of ways. But looking at my brother priests who are on Twitter, and I've done this occasionally, just to tweet photos of my sort of personal life, with my friends and my family, where I'm not even there. Sometimes, I once had a rule that I'm not allowed any pictures of me without my habit on in social media. That was early on, and I still generally hold to that, but there are occasions where others will put, oh yeah, you can put that on your Twitter account, I'm okay with that, And so it's...
I never asked.
I know, well, I just... presumed you would. So, humanizing.
It's a sin of presumption.
No, it wasn't a sin. It was based on our friendship. So humanizing, as priests, it's true. The old way, when older priests talk about this, they would say, well, when your parishioners see you in the grocery store, they're always going to be curious what Father has. First of all, they're going to be surprised to see you in the grocery store, as though you don't ever shop for your groceries. People know priests are normal people, but they don't really.
Same with your teacher. Like, you don't want to see your teacher, right?
Yeah, I don't want to see my teacher at the grocery store. So, but when a priest opens up his life like that, to share his prayers, to share his life that people don't get to see very often, and once again, it's prudence in how often you do that. It's a humanizing effect for his account and for him, but also for those who follow him, right? And so our novice master encouraged us never to make absolute rules, like I will always wear my habit here, or I will always wear clerics, like to always be prudential. And that's really the Dominican way for us. Even though you see us mostly in our habits, I mean, we don't wear our habits all the time, right? So we're very prudential about that. So most of the time in habits, but not when we're playing soccer, obviously, unlike some religious women, right? And not also also if we're with our family over Thanksgiving dinner, perhaps, right? So having that human side of it is really effective, and that doesn't make me some sort of, and I'm going to use a term that if we put this on Twitter, some might not like, but that doesn't make me a sort of flaming liberal who walks around in khakis and a polo shirt all the time, right? I think it makes me just human.
It does. It's great to hear the laughter, because I think this is something that people know about Twitter, which is that it's replaced TV for many people. Twitter's become a kind of source of entertainment as well as a source of news, and it's actually a better form of entertainment in some ways, because there's something isolating about TV entertainment, but there can be something communal and playful about the entertainment of Twitter, and so you should think about it as a good leisure. There's some good leisure in social media, and it's not all dispute. It shouldn't be all serious all the time. There should be friendships that are visible. There should be jokes which are visible. There should be images of your family that are funny. Memes. Bishop Umbers does such a wonderful job with memes and making people laugh and think at once. That's a tremendously. I know some people who became Catholic through Bishop Umbers' memes. And you just think that's very powerful. That it's a form of play that attracted somebody to the faith. And so there's something humanizing about approaching it with leisure, with humor, with humility. Those are all good things about social media. We all know the bad things, but those are good things, and to think that there's a good leisure that we can help inculcate in this kind of form.
I'm glad you mentioned that about, the people became Catholic because of Bishop Umbers' memes. And maybe the media nuns track to this much more than I do, or notice this trend. I noticed this year, after the Easter Vigil, many more accounts on Twitter saying that they became Catholic after following a lot of Catholic Twitter accounts.
I get it all the time.
I do too, but I just noticed it publicly.
Yeah, they're stating it, right?
Like they're stating it in a way I don't think in previous years they did. Did you all notice that? It just seems like it was up this year.
Yeah.
It was quite exceptional. There were quite a few.
I just came into the church thanks to these 10 accounts that I follow, right?
Yeah, it was really quite amazing to see that. Now it's your turn.
Set proper limits. You didn't probably, when you watch TV, you probably didn't watch 16 hours of TV a day, and you shouldn't be on Twitter 16 hours a day. But it's in your pocket all the time, and so it's something that you could feel like you need to tweet all day long. To be a creature is to recognize your limits. You're a contingent creature. No one needs you on Twitter. No one will miss you when you're gone. It's a gratuitous thing, and so ask what the gratuity is and what are the limits to that gratuity.
Number 9 is making friends. To make friends on Twitter. We talked about this at the very beginning. In some ways, this is the Christian thing, to see charity as friendship. Firstly, friendship with God, and because you're friends with God, to be friends with those whom God loves, because you love God, and so you love what God loves and who God loves. It's looking back over, I've been on Twitter since 2012, also got involved because I was watching the election, and all they were doing was quoting Twitter, and I thought, well, I don't need to watch Fox News to read Twitter to me. I'll just get on Twitter,
Yeah.
But I've just taken of all the friendships that I've developed and have grown, and some of whom I still have yet to meet in real life, but we've become very good friends on Twitter. People like, I think of Greg Hills, Charlie Camosi in some ways, people I would not naturally sort of gravitate towards. Even how Ed Condon and I sort of became friends first on Twitter. Chad's and my friendship sort of grew through Twitter. A lot of other ways. We
didn't start there, but it grew.
We were trying to figure out where it started. We can't remember.
Dinner party.
Someone's dinner party. The exposure, for me that's the democracy at its best, where you can actually become friends with people that you would not otherwise necessarily interact with.
It flips off the digital page onto real life.
Yeah, well, I don't think she'd mind me saying this, but like Jeannie Gaffigan, and I became pretty good friends, like private messaging him, like when the Gaffigans, remember the Jim Gaffigan show they had two? I remember tweeting her about that I didn't like the way they were representing the priest, and he was kind of a geeky, I didn't like how they represented the priest. And she replied, she sent me a private message how her mother told her the same thing. So we went back and forth for like weeks on how to properly represent a priest, on the show. And got to talk about other things too. It was just really a great sort of thing to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to have, if you are going to spend any time at all, even a small amount of time, it's good to identify some friends that you can have a less public conversation with, a DM, a direct message conversation. I know we have direct message conversations with, I'm in a few small groups, and it's very helpful to show each other. We share the news with each other. We talk about the news with each other before we are doing anything publicly. And I think especially for priests who are going to have any kind of witness on social media, it's good to have a few brother priests that you're also kind of talking about the news together, talking about personalities on Twitter, what they're talking about, and also providing you a little fraternal correction for how you might be presenting yourself, because we're not always our best judge, our own best judge. And so to have some groups where you have friends who are aware of your Twitter presence, who support your Twitter presence, and are also willing to offer you some friendly criticism. I know, Father Petri said, that's a really stupid tweet, you should delete that, and I delete it, right? I don't think that's ever happened, I'm just making that up. But that sort of thing is a good thing to cultivate, so that it's not a lonely practice or just a solitary practice of preening, but it's actually your presence there is guided by friendship.
And I would say, the fraternal correction is a very important thing, especially for priests and religious. I have, as you know, I have a very strong presence on Twitter, probably more than most other Dominicans, and so a lot of my brothers,
more than any other Dominican.
Yeah, okay. But I have brothers who are on Twitter who are very interested and occasionally will send me a quick email. So, okay, that last one might have been slightly close to the lie. That one might have been over the line, Yeah. So, and I'll delete it. And Chad and I do the same with each other. Yeah. So he'll send me a draft and he'll say, "What do you think about this one?" And I'll say something like, "Well, I wouldn't tweet it, but I think you're good to go."
Yeah, and I think also the other aspect of the more public aspect of friendship is that the hope that you can turn those who are against you into friends.
Yeah.
This conversion has to be at the heart of any commitment to the church's witness on social media. It has to always be ordered to conversion. Hidden among our enemies, St. Augustine ends his first book of the City of God. Hidden among our enemies are future friends and citizens of the city of God. This is how every day of our witness on Twitter has to be mindful of conversion.
Lastly is to pray. To pray before you tweet, especially if it's a serious dispute or conversation you're having. It doesn't need to be something grand. It doesn't even have to be as long as a Hail Mary or an Our Father or Glory Be.
Just cross yourself.
Cross yourself and, Lord, take this one, It's just to be mindful of that. To be mindful that everything good that we do, every moment of evangelization, every moment of truth speaking, every moment of self-sacrificing love, is something that we do only by the power of grace, only within grace.
And I would say I actually pray on Twitter a lot. This may sound odd, but people ask for prayers on Twitter a lot. A lot.
Yeah.
Like people ask for prayers all the time on Twitter. And as a discipline for myself, I take the time to pray for that person who's at it. I like their tweet, and then I at least say one Hail Mary for them.
I've said, masses for people who've asked to have masses said. As a religious, I have a little bit more of a freedom to do that than many diocesan priests will. As a diocesan priest, so often, you'll be celebrating whatever the parish intention is. But as a religious, we often have a lot more freedom to say masses for personal intentions, and I take that very seriously. So, yeah.
Okay,
we
those
use
are
most of the time.
Yeah, it takes a long time to talk about principles. Your questions are open to anything. We've got
about
5 minutes for any kind of thoughts or reflections or questions. Yeah, John. Oh, yeah.
Sure. First, the first one is no straw men. Always argue the best presentation of an interlocutor's argument. The second is to privilege truth above politics. Don't be partisan. Everything the object is the truth and pursuing the truth. The third is to discern shared premises and anticipate objections. The fourth is to use authorities well. The fifth, to illuminate reality with God and good distinctions. The sixth is to recognize people and not their handles, that there's somebody behind those anonymous accounts. The seventh is to humanize through humor and humility. The eighth, set proper limits. Number 9 is to make friends and also to count on your friends. And number 10 is to pray. Cassidy.
So I have a question. I was wondering, we've talked mostly about Twitter in this particular talk, and when we did our podcast episode, just as like a place for debate and sort of a platform that lends itself to that back and forth conversation. I was wondering, have you delved into any other social media platforms to an extent to know to what degree you might want to emphasize other principles or how they might apply differently in those forums?
Personally, I have not. I do have a Facebook account. I have a personal one and a public page. I have a Snapchat account, and I never get on them. I don't understand it. Instagram, I have no idea how this thing
Delete
works.
your Snapchat. I didn't know that format.
Yeah. That's amazing. I don't know how it works. I get a message, that somebody added something to their story, and I click on it. I think, okay.
Actually, I've heard that Snapchat's cleaned up.
Oh, it is very clean, yeah. I thought if the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist, could be on Snapchat, it would be okay for me. So, but it's not. From what I can tell, Snapchat isn't sort of openly social, right? You choose who you're messaging with, and so, yeah.
It's more like direct messaging almost.
Kind of, yeah.
Facebook's really the only thing that's close to Twitter, and it's just it's a softer, gentler kind of engagement usually.
Yeah.
So
I can't.
The
really.
principles that hold for Twitter engagement hold for Facebook engagement, I think, but I don't think those principles necessarily work well with, say, Instagram, which is really about it's an aesthetic.
Pictures, right?
It's an aesthetic kind of thing where
I'm going to start taking pictures of myself holding up Thomistic principles like a whiteboard. Maybe I can start putting that on Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram is. People are. I don't know. I use Instagram as like our family photo album because we used to have actual physical photo albums, but now we don't take physical photos anymore, so we have to put them somewhere.
Yeah, what are you gonna do when Instagram goes under?
So yeah, I don't know. I'll have to pay to have them printed then. But so I think this really only applies to Twitter and Facebook.
You talked a lot about like shared premises, and I'm wondering how do you recommend like engaging in a dialogue that has virtually no shared principle? I'm sure everybody can like think of certain topics that just like there's just.
Well, I have to tell you, I vacillate on this, and Chad will probably have a better answer than I do. Sometimes I despair because there aren't, if you can't even, one basic shared principle is the preeminence and excellence of the human species above all other species,
Mm-hmm.
That is less and less a shared principle, a shared premise. And it's kind of hard to know how to move forward on other issues if we can't even agree on that. On Twitter, I would not. If that's where I'm at on Twitter, I just don't think that's the place to have that kind of argument, right? Person to person over a good bourbon, I can sort of help to try to get to what we humans do, like try to work out through our functions what the essence is, that we can think, we love. Try to get them to see that their dogs do not think and love the way we do, which is also...
Well, then if you can get to that, you're getting at shared premises.
Exactly. But I just don't think you can do it on Twitter.
Well, I think I'm more optimistic. I think that you can, for the person who's willing to do it in conversation, there's probably the same person who would be willing to do it on Twitter. But you do need a certain willingness to engage in a back and forth that's civil, that's patient, that... I think shared premises are not self-evident.
That's right.
And you have to be patient to argue to them. The French bishops today put out a good statement that said, basically our moral disputes are seen as moralizing in public because we don't have a shared understanding of human nature. I think this is exactly right. And the French bishops put out this very good statement to say, what we need to propose is we need to make progress on shared premises about what the human being is in order to make progress on what we think is good for human happiness and human flourishing and the moral goods that are required for that. And that's actually a very good example of prelates who stand up and say, we want to have the debate about the moral good, but before we get there, we need to establish some shared premises about what human beings are.
Yeah.
And I think you can do that on social media too. And actually just being aware of that actually will help you in the debate that you might be having or the disagreement that you might be having with somebody.
I mean, that's pedagogically the right direction to go, to start with being and then to move to doing, right? As a technical thing, my experience of having some of these debates on Twitter, these arguments or these discussions on Twitter, is to be mindful if you're going to do this, as other people jump in and start replying, you've got to be careful which thread you're replying to.
Yeah.
I try to stay with the one interlocutor, and even as other people jump in, I make sure I always reply to the first interlocutor, that everyone else can witness that. Because the moment you start including everybody else in your replies, it starts to spread like wildfire, and then all of a sudden you can lose. And the way Twitter's algorithm works, if you keep replying to the same interlocutor, it stays on the same thread. So they only have to find one of those tweets and they can see the whole thing. But if you start replying to everybody else, and that's just my own, I don't have a brain that can, I'm not Thomas Aquinas, I can't work with 5 scribes at once, okay? I can basically have one interlocutor at a time on these deep issues.
I wouldn't be afraid to go deep on Twitter.
Right.
A lot of people talk about Twitter as if it is this thing in which you are only bound to say the most simplistic thing in the world, but that's not true. I mean, most of Thomas's sentences can fit in a tweet.
Yeah.
You can say very profound thing when there's certain bishops who speak on Twitter and they say very profound things. So I think it's a poor assumption to think you can't actually say the profound and thought-provoking thing, and it's also a mistake to say that you can't actually engage in a dispute that's intelligible and that advances understanding. It just takes the willingness of 2 parties or more who want to pursue that, who actually think there's a truth to be found. If you're like the skeptics of the Third Academy, then you don't think there's a truth to be found, you're just point scoring, right? It's Aristology. But if you think truth can be found, then you can actually advance. But I mean, that's the most fundamental shared premise, that truth can be found. So if you share that, you can make more progress.
Good. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having
this
us.
conversation. This was awesome.
Good, thank you.
Good. I hope you